Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. We recently talked about one of my favorite handheld systems, the Sega Game Gear. But right behind that on the list is the PS Vita, which made landfall here in the US in early 2012. With an OLED screen and one seriously impressive game library, it's hard not to gravitate towards it. In 2014, we got the PlayStation TV, which was basically a Vita without a screen that hooks up directly to your TV with support for the PlayStation 3 and 4 controllers. Unfortunately, mine had stopped working a few years ago, but I was lucky enough to stumble upon a new PSTV, and so what better time to cover it on the channel? Let's jump in. Okay, here it is. Yep, this is it. It's pretty small when next to the Vita, and seemingly more so when you compare the hardware, which is identical in terms of CPU, memory, and graphics. Of course, what's not included in the PSTV would be things like the gyroscope, microphone, and the display screen itself. These omissions would limit the official playable library to about 100 games, though there are ways to remove the sometimes arbitrary restriction. How it works is super simple. Just plug in the power, HDMI, and a controller, optionally a network cable because it will support Wi-Fi, and that's it. To play a game, simply pop one in the side and you're off. It's simple, but it works. Let's check out some games. Okay, the first game up is Muramasa Rebirth. This is a gorgeous action RPG that lives on the 2D axis exclusively. You're in Japan with some of the best art on the platform that really pops on the Vita's OLED screen, and of course the PSTV that further enhances depending on your TV. You'll play as a ninja who begins to collect blades or swords that can wield various powers for enemies and can also overcome barriers in the map, acting as gates that can control plot points. Multiple swords can be equipped at any one time, and your ninja can switch ad hocly between with a button press. Sometimes switching between swords in the middle of a fight is necessary because they can break from defending. When that happens, your sword does less damage and you're unable to block anymore. By switching your sword from the broken one, it will start to repair itself, and your new sword will unleash a spot attack automatically from switching. The stages, as mentioned, are beautiful, and despite being solely in 2D, they utilize the vertical space really well across all the different landscapes. There's something so satisfying about the movement of the character, but that's also magnified by the stage design. Tall trees that you can double jump up to and or float down from, tall Japanese buildings that you can scale quickly, and lush fields that you can ninja sprint across are just some of the great examples. Even though it's in 2D, there's lots of branching paths, so thankfully they include a map, as it can get a bit confusing which path to take until you've hit a dead end and need to backtrack. Along the way, you're going to get into encounters, which will switch you into a battle mode to perform elegant combat until your screen is clear of the bad guys. Afterwards, you'll be ranked on performance on things like speed of clearing, if you took damage, etc., which will all yield bonus experience points. There's a ton of story to the game, all of which is voice acted exclusively in Japanese. I don't mind it personally, but for some I can see how that might be a bit distracting when you're trying to read all of the text. Of course, there's bosses, which all have some pretty cool art design themselves, certainly unique. These present an increased challenge like they should, but I do wish they had a little bit more of a pattern to them instead of just the button mashing that they are. Don't get me wrong, you'll need to dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge your way through various attacks, but the majority of it you're just kind of wailing through a considerable amount of health bars. Overall, not bad at all, and a great game to enjoy on a bigger screen through the PSTV. Let's move on. Next up is what you'd get if Persona and Pikmin had a baby, and I use that metaphor a bit literal as you'll find out why. This is Conception 2. The whole point of this strange game is to conceive children with classmates to create star babies that will fight alongside you in battle. As completely ridiculous as that sounds, it's true, and you'll work to build relationships with your classmates a la a Persona style, and then go to church, and you'll do it as the game's not-so-subtle innuendo stabs at the act called classmating. These battle babies will get combat jobs and join you as you explore their labyrinths like little Pikmin running around. They won't be solving any puzzles in this game though, as the dungeons are more akin to the early random dungeons from, again, the Persona series, with different layouts filled with monsters. Combat is turn-based with a ton of mechanics for gaining an edge on your opponent, but the main idea is positioning yourself in a strategic space relative to the monsters. In general, I found the fights to be way on the easy side, especially in the beginning, but they just kept throwing tutorial after tutorial after tutorial that really just slowed down the pace of the game in general. Bosses at the end of each of the labyrinths were again on the easy side, given the more mature theme of all the sexual innuendo, not to mention the outfits and the bouncing. Well, you get the idea. I'm just surprised that the actual combat itself wasn't more challenging. You have your typical RPG things like weapons, items, shops, training, and more that is all accessible from the school campus. This hub works fine for the goal, but since the dungeons are all in a 3D exploration setting, this easily could have done that as well instead of just menuing, but I digress. Building your relationships with other classmates is more like a dating simulation, and it actually reminded me of the other Atlas game we talked about recently called Thousand Arms. The dialogue isn't as cringe here, but overall it does have a similar vibe. It's not bad, to be clear, it's just done so much better in Persona. The art, the backgrounds, and heck, even the UI looks just like most of the polished Atlas games, so it's going to feel right at home. There's a bit of a heavier anime influence with this game, and there's plenty of spots where it will cut over to full anime cutscenes to progress the plot points, and that's actually really neat. Overall, it's definitely unique, I'll give it that. If this seems like something you might enjoy, it works great on the PlayStation TV.
Here I come! Is it over?
I need to become stronger.
Okay, next up is Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. If you saw my video on modern games inspired from retro classics, you know I really enjoyed this great throwback to the early Castlevania games. When Sony really started to pull support for the Vita, one thing that they didn't expect was how passionate game publishers would overwhelmingly respond by continually pumping out games for it well beyond its official lifecycle. Bloodstained is a great example of that, thankfully, and it got a physical release from Limited Run in 2018. If you missed my video on it, the quick version is that Curse of the Moon was a supplementary Kickstarter companion game for the bigger Symphony of the Night style release Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. In Curse of the Moon, you begin as Zangetsu, this revenge-seeking swordsman who is traveling the beautiful 8-bit inspired levels of its spiritual predecessor. The stage design follows closely in the footsteps of Castlevania 3 specifically, with branching paths and unique challenges for specific characters. To that end, once you defeat one of the early bosses, you're faced with a decision on your next action, which consists of either recruiting, killing, or ignoring new potential allies. Each possible decision leads to an alternative means of completing the rest of the game, and all are worth exploring through multiple playthroughs. The first choice I'll cover is recruiting allies, making them playable characters for the rest of the game, gaining their unique powers and usually unlocking viable branches in future stages. For each ally that you've recruited, they'll each act as an extra life before a game over when you have no more allies to select from. While alive though, you can actually switch between them instantly, which can make for some really great gameplay mechanics. The second choice is to kill them, which gives Zangetsu a significant upgrade like double jump, a stronger attack, and more. This is an interesting and overall challenging way to complete the game, as you don't get any of the extra lives from the allies, and your path through each stage is now longer. The last choice is that you can ignore the allies altogether, not getting any power-ups and not gaining any new character. Obviously this is the hardest challenge, but your reward is yet again another ending to the story, which is tied to all of the combination of choices mentioned. The physics are tight and the combat is balanced to near perfection for those that really enjoy the NES trilogy of Castlevania games. The boss battles specifically are spectacular and capstone this game as an instant classic in my opinion. Of course, being a later release, this isn't exclusively on the Vita, but it is a great option to play it, especially if you already have the PlayStation TV. Let's move on. Okay, next up is Ys Memories of Celceta. I have to start out by just saying that I'm really in love with this series. I genuinely think it's one of the best action RPG series that still releases today, including the latest release, Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. For those that are familiar with this series already, you'll again play as Adol, our favorite adventurer. If you've never played a game in the Ys series, this red-headed hero is the series staple, analogous to Link from Zelda perhaps. While Adol will be the main character, he'll be joined by other party members to help in combat, which is all done through real-time attacking, augmented by special skills and a super special skill that needs to be built up over time. These supplemental characters are important, as each will have a unique attack type, like Slash or Pierce for example, that can really aid when fighting enemies and bosses that are weak to certain types. To take advantage of this mechanic, you can switch between any character in your party instantly to control them instead. While you do this, the non-player controlled characters run on an auto AI.
Leave it to me.
Another combat mechanic that makes a return is parrying and evading incoming attacks that can come down to just a timing element that can really give you an advantage in battle when you master that. Overall, the combat of these games, especially from the PSP releases onwards, really found a sweet spot of action-based combat, and this installment is no exception. The Ys series has a lot of titles, and so while it can feel intimidating to jump in, despite there being some continuity, it's more than feasible to jump into any without previous game knowledge and not missing a beat, as most can feel standalone. This game is no different, since Adol shows up in town with amnesia to kick the game off, so even though it technically falls between Ys 2 and 3 in the timeline, it doesn't really matter unless you're trying to go for some sort of canonical order. After arriving in town and meeting up with someone who knows you but not vice versa from the amnesia, a disturbance in the local mind thrusts Adol into action and emerges as a hero of the town. As a newly minted local hero, you're hired to explore the land of Celceta for the seemingly innocent purposes of map making for the local military. Along the way, Adol will find orbs and other interactions that recover parts of his memories lost before the game's story actually began. Of course, these recovered memories hint at a troubled past and also acts as a foreboding warning of what's to come in their exploration. Determined to recover his memories, Adol and his old/new-again friend set out on the adventure, eventually collecting more allies to the group. While the original Vita release included some touchscreen interactions, I had no trouble navigating the game or its menus on the PSTV.
Hold on.
Okay, next up is Breach and Clear. I've talked a bit about the awesome level of support the Vita received after its abandonment from Sony, but one of the biggest jumpstarts to that is the onset of independent publishers like Limited Run Games making physical releases for this great system. Limited Run's first game is Breach and Clear, and outside of the mobile and PC releases, this Vita copy is the only home console version to play.
Flashbang out.
It's also incredibly rare, at a total of only 1,500 copies produced, which is a shame since this is a super fun game. Breach and Clear is a turn-based tactical game where you control a special military team infiltrating dangerous mission levels to eradicate all the threats, hence the title. Where the tactical component comes in is that you'll be planning and selecting each soldier's movements before ultimately running the simulation of events for the turn.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Frag out.
All clear.
This gameplay is really engaging and addictive to try to perfect your own performance, and I often found myself repeating levels until I could rank higher. I was trying to think of another game in this strategy or tactical genre that mimics this simultaneous play, but I came up short. If you know of one, let me know in the comments down below. There's a fair amount of RPG mechanics to the gameplay as well, where your squadron will level up and earn stat points to distribute how you see fit. These all play a role as there's tons of inputs like movement speed, fire accuracy, reaction time, and more that all come into play during each turn's simulation phase. I definitely need to spend more time with this game as it doesn't pull punches in terms of difficulty, and if you're not being strategic with your planning, it's easy to wind up with teammates down. Overall, this is a great game and even better with its PSTV compatibility.
Yes, sir.
Consider it done.
Alright, and there you have it, the PlayStation TV. Of course, it's a real shame that it and the Vita weren't better supported by Sony, especially when you look at what Nintendo and their Switch has done in that same hybrid space of handheld and TV gaming with massive success. So, would I recommend the PS TV? It's an interesting question, right? The Vita by itself is really amazing, and with the truncation to about 100 playable games on the PS TV, without circumventing that is, I'd say it could be hard to justify the price tag, but it's going to depend on your own goals. I clearly rebought it, so that should say something too. Let me know what your favorite compatible PlayStation TV games are in the comments down below, and I'd love to circle back to this system again in the future. Until then, as always, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.